Hey guys, tonight we slip into the smoky air of Viking longhouse, where dawn stirs not with battle horns or swords, but with the shuffling hooves of goats on straw. You hear the faint bleating just outside, the creak of wooden beams above, and the slow crackle of fire someone forgot to bank properly overnight. It's not the kind of place you'd imagine heroes being forged, but it's the exact sort of place where actual lives unfolded. The goats are already awake, heads pressed against wooden doors, demanding to be noticed before anyone else. You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to hay, but for now you're fine. Just sneeze politely into your sleeve. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air inside the longhouse is thick with smoke that drifts lazily from the central hearth up toward the roof, where small holes let it leak into the pale sky. You feel the warmth of goat hair blankets across your lap, though they're scratchy enough to remind you they weren't made in a luxury store. You wiggle your toes against the packed earth floor and notice how close everything feels. Walls of timber, beds lined side by side, neighbors snoring just a little too loudly. Privacy isn't really a thing here. You live among family, farmhands, and sometimes travelers, all stitched into one smoky cocoon. A goat snorts. And you realize they're not just livestock, they're part of the alarm clock system. Vikings didn't have roosters in every yard, but goats bleated insistently enough to ensure no one overslept. Historians still argue whether longhouses had designated stalls for goats inside, or whether they slept outside in pens. Either way, the sound bleeds into your morning, as natural as the rising sun. You push yourself upright, bumping your head lightly on a beam. You're not the first. The wood is polished smooth by years of bumps, scratches, and occasional muttered curses. Someone nearby grumbles awake, wraps a cloak around their shoulders, and heads outside with a wooden pail. You trail behind, your breath forming little clouds in the chill morning air. The world outside is pale blue, the sun only beginning to stretch fingers across the horizon. Goats bounce clumsily in the yard, their horns catching glimmers of light. They rush forward, hooves tapping against frosty ground, eager for food. You crouch down, reaching out to stroke one. The fur is wiry, smelling faintly of hay and smoke. One particularly stubborn goat nudges you in the ribs like it's demanding breakfast, and honestly, it is. A mainstream fact slips in here. Viking goats weren't just background props. They were key to survival. Their milk-fed families. Their hair became rope or fabric, and their meat, when necessary, was a reliable food source in harsh winters. Without goats, entire households might have gone hungry. You start to see why their presence is treated less like decoration and more like lifeline. Then comes a quirky tidbit. Some households believe goats could sense the weather better than any sailor or farmer. If goats suddenly refuse to leave their pen, people mutter about storms or bad luck coming. Imagine relying on your goat the way you check a weather app. Except your app is chewing cud and occasionally trying to eat your sleeve. The morning hum grows louder. We're being split, buckets filled, voices yawning into wakefulness. The longhouse is never quiet for long. You notice how routines unfold without anyone really discussing them. Children scatter to fetch water. Older folk gather herbs or mend clothing. And someone always ends up sweeping straw, because goats make more mess than you thought possible. You stand with a mug of warm milk in your hands, still frothy from the pail, and the warmth trickles into you like caffeine would today. It's simple, but it's enough to keep the body steady for hours of labor ahead. You tilt the mug back and imagine if baristas today served it. One goat milk latte, fresh from the source. Not exactly Instagram friendly, unless your followers are into barnyard chic. As the sky brightens, the goats settle into a rhythm. Some lying down, some nose in the earth for scraps, one attempting to climb onto a wooden barrel, like it's auditioning for a circus. Life is repetitive but strangely comforting, each day anchored by the same bleats, the same straw underfoot, the same smell of smoke and wool. And as you stand there, the thought sneaks in. For all the sagas about dragons and battles, most Viking mornings probably look just like this. Smoke, goats, blankets, and the stubborn comfort of surviving another dawn. The goats are still fussing in the yard when you pull one of those scratchy goat hair blankets tighter around your shoulders. It doesn't matter that the air has warmed slightly. The blanket feels like the closest thing to comfort you'll get this early. The fibers itch against your neck, but the weight is reassuring, like a hug from someone who smells faintly of hay. You glance around the longhouse and notice a neat pile of these blankets stacked near the beds, each one woven in a slightly different pattern. Proof that no two families ever spun or dyed their fibers quite the same way. A mainstream historical fact fits right here. Viking households really did use goat hair, not only for rope but also woven into coarse fabrics. While sheepswool gets most of the glory, goat fibers held their place in everyday survival. Sometimes goat hair was blended with wool to make things sturdier, sometimes it stood on its own, and sometimes it was just scratchy. You roll your shoulders and decide comfort standards in the Viking age were definitely set a bit lower than your modern mattress expectations. The quirky tidbit? Some sagas make passing jokes about blankets that were so rough, they doubled as exfoliation tools. You don't know if that's true or just poetic exaggeration, but as you rub the fabric absent-mindedly against your skin, you can imagine someone waking up with a surprisingly fresh glow thanks to their nightly battle with goat hair. Congratulations! You invented the Viking spa routine. You shuffle closer to the hearth, where embers glow faintly. Someone tosses in a log, and the flames flare up, lighting the beams overhead. The glow spills across more blankets, hanging on a rack to dry. The smell of smoke mingles with lanolin and hay, creating that odd longhouse perfume you can't wash out no matter how many times you shake the cloth. You notice how people argue playfully over who gets the thickest blanket in winter. It's not malicious, just a daily negotiation of a shared life. Kids drag blankets across the floor like capes, pretending to be heroes. Adults mutter about drafts sneaking into the walls, swearing the wind aims only at their beds. You smile because you realize warmth isn't distributed equally here. It's bartered, begged for, or stolen when someone falls asleep. Historians still argue whether Viking longhouses were genuinely warm or more like giant refrigerators with smoky accents. Some claim the central fire did the job, especially with blankets, cloaks, and bodies packed in close. Others argue that the drafty walls and open vents made winters brutal no matter what. As you sit wrapped in goat hair, feeling both toasty and itchy, you decide the truth was probably somewhere in between. Warm enough to survive, uncomfortable enough to keep complaining alive. A goat wanders inside through the half-open door. Nobody shouts. Nobody rushes to chase it out. It simply clops across the dirt floor, sniffs the blankets, and curls up in a corner like it owns the place. You watch someone toss a little straw at it, muttering that goats have the best seat in the house. The irony isn't lost. Sometimes the animals live more comfortably than the people. Your blanket slips from your shoulder, and you pull it back up, the fabric brushing your cheek. It carries a faint salty tang, probably from sweat soaked in last summer when someone wore it working near the sea. You imagine fibers holding stories the way skin holds scars, proof of countless days of work, laughter, and stubborn survival. The longhouse bustles more now. Someone is spinning yarn at a wheel, pulling fibers tight between fingers that look permanently lined with creases. Someone else is patching an old blanket, using thread that doesn't quite match, but matches enough. You realize nothing here goes to waste. Even frayed goat hair can be retwisted, rewoven, repurposed. Your modern self might call it upcycling. But here it's just life. You run your hand across the blanket again, and the coarseness feels almost calming, like textured grounding against your palm. You think about how, in a world of battles and voyages, comfort was handmade, thread by thread, fiber by fiber, often by people whose names never appear in the sagas. And in this small detail, blankets made from goat hair, you glimpse the ordinary heartbeat of Viking life. Not battles, not conquests, not even the gods, just people huddled under scratchy covers, negotiating warmth and teasing goats that steal a nap by the fire. You lean back, listening to the bleats outside fading into soft hums, and let the weight of the blanket press you further into calm. The morning slides fully into place as the sound of goats bleating outside rises and falls, a rhythm that threads itself into the daily routine. You shuffle toward the yard, rubbing sleep from your eyes, carrying a wooden pail that feels heavier than it looks. The goats are already waiting, horns glinting in the sun, hooves tapping against the frosty ground, eyes fixed on you with that unsettling mix of innocence and entitlement. They know exactly what's about to happen, and they are far more excited about it than you are. You crouch down beside the first goat, pressing your forehead lightly against its side. Just like the older hands taught you, there's a strange comfort in that closeness. The steady warmth of the animal, the musky smell of its coat, the way its body shifts slightly with every breath. You reach down, grip the teat gently, and begin the slow, steady rhythm of milking. The sound is soft but unmistakable, liquid hitting wood, steady and patient. This is where a mainstream historical fact fits neatly. Dairy, especially from goats and cows, was a staple of Viking diets. Milk wasn't just drunk fresh. It was turned into butter, cheese, and even fermented into sour drinks that lasted far longer than plain milk could. In some regions, goat milk was preferred because goats could graze in rocky, uneven terrain where cows struggled. You can almost taste the sharp tang of goat cheese before it's even made, knowing it will end up on someone's bread before the day is over. Of course, not every goat is cooperative. One decides that kicking the pail is the funniest joke it can pull today. Milk sloshes onto your shoes and you sigh. The goat stares back at you, eyes wide and entirely unapologetic. You mutter under your breath, though you half expect the goat to smirk. If goats had a motto, it would probably be something like, cause chaos, receive pats anyway. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some Viking households believed goats had personalities tied to luck. A stubborn goat could be a sign of coming misfortune, while a cheerful, easygoing goat was considered a blessing. Whether that was genuine belief or just frustrated farmers projecting their feelings is anyone's guess. Still, you can't help wondering if your milk-spilling troublemaker is an omen or just a jerk. Around you, the longhouse yard hums with life. Children dart between goats, laughing when a kid, the four-legged kind, tries to chase them. Adults carry buckets, set out hay, and occasionally step in something they wish they hadn't. You settle into the rhythm of the task. Pail filling slowly, the air warming as the sun climbs higher. Historians still argue whether Vikings preferred goat milk or cow milk in daily use. Some archaeological evidence suggests cows were favored where land allowed, while goats dominated in rougher terrain. The debate may never be settled, because the reality was likely as mixed as the herds themselves. Standing here, pail in hand, you don't feel the need for an answer. You just know milk meant survival, whichever creature it came from. When the first goat is done, you shuffle to the next. This one stands patiently, chewing on something invisible, staring into the distance like it's contemplating philosophy. You find the rhythm again, listening to the steady splash. The pail grows heavier, and your hands ache slightly, but there's something soothing about it, almost meditative. You glance around at the others working and realize this ritual isn't just about milk. It's about anchoring the day. Every morning begins here with goats, pails, and patience. You picture the same scene happening hundreds of years ago, over and over, long before sagas were ever written. When the work is finally done, you carry the pail back inside, arms straining a little. The longhouse smells richer now, smoke, wool, and fresh milk mingling into an oddly comforting scent. Someone pours a little into a clay cup and hands it to you. You sip, and the warmth spreads through you, richer than any coffee, even if it tastes sharper than your tongue expects. As you sit there, cup in hand, goats settling back into their pens outside, you realize how central this ritual is. Milking isn't glamorous. It's not sung about by poets. But without it, there'd be no cheese, no butter, no creamy stew simmering at the hearth tonight. Just empty bowls and grumbling stomachs. You take another sip, leaning back against the wall, and let the simplicity of it settle into your bones. The pail of milk is tucked safely on a shelf, and with that chore finished, the thought of food creeps in. Your stomach growls loudly enough that one of the kids giggles, pointing at you as if hunger is something scandalous. You roll your eyes and follow the smell drifting through the longhouse. Bread baking on hot stones, smoke curling lazily from the hearth, and the unmistakable tang of goat cheese being sliced onto wooden platters. Breakfast is a simple affair, but in its own way, it feels almost like a feast. You sit on a low bench, the wood worn smooth from generations of fidgeting backsides, and accept a piece of bread. It's coarse, rough around the edges, with more texture and flavor, but once you smear it with fresh cheese, it transforms. The sharp tang cuts through the heaviness, and suddenly you understand why this combination has survived for centuries. A few dried berries appear on the table as well, tossed into the mix like a surprise treat. It's not luxurious, but it's steady, filling, and you suspect it will stick to your ribs better than any modern protein bar. Here's the mainstream historical fact sliding into place. Viking diets were surprisingly diverse, depending on location and season. While fish, grains, and meat made up staples, dairy, especially cheese, was central. Archaeological digs have uncovered remnants of dairy fats in pottery. Clear proof that cheese wasn't just a luxury, it was a routine. Goats, with their ability to thrive where cows couldn't, became quiet heroes of the pantry. Across the table, someone cracks a joke about the cheese being strong enough to walk away on its own. Laughter ripples through the room, and you catch yourself grinning. You can't help noticing that humor seems to travel as easily across centuries as bread and cheese. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some stories whisper that certain cheeses were left on doorsteps at night to appease wandering spirits, or maybe just hungry neighbors. The line between folklore and practical charity blurs when you imagine someone sneaking a bite in the dark, claiming the elves must have taken it. You glance at your bread, suddenly amused at the thought of offering a slice to invisible dinner guests. Outside, goats bleat impatiently, as if jealous that their milk has already turned into someone else's breakfast. One bangs its head against the fence, and the thud echoes into the longhouse like a knock at the door. Someone mutters, even they know it's mealtime, while tossing a handful of hay out the door. Historians still argue whether Viking meals were communal in the sense of everyone eating together or more staggered, depending on rank and household status. Evidence suggests both may have been true at different times and places, which makes sense when you picture it. Sometimes everyone gathers, sometimes people just grab food when they can, depending on chores, trade, or sheer goat-related chaos. Sitting here, you don't see a grand ceremony, just tired faces, shared laughter, and enough bread to go around. The bread crumbles in your hands as you chew, dense and hearty, filling the spaces in your stomach that had started to whine earlier. The cheese softens with the heat of the fire, spreading more easily as it melts into the rough surface of the bread. It's not fancy, but there's comfort in how unchanging it feels, as though you could sit down at this table in any year across 1,000 and find the same breakfast waiting. Children finish their slices quickly, crumbs dusting their shirts, before racing outside to chase goats. The bleats rise again, laughter weaving between them, and the longhouse settles into that hum of morning energy. Chores ahead, work waiting, but bellies at least a little fuller. You lean back, stretch, and think to yourself that the world doesn't need feasts every day. Sometimes bread and cheese are enough. You wipe your hands on your cloak, crumbs scattering onto the floor, and watch the smoke curling upward once more. The fire pops, someone refills a cup, and a goat outside sneezes loudly like it's offended by being left out of breakfast. You chuckle under your breath, wondering if even the goats know they're the uncelebrated backbone of Viking mornings. You step outside, breadcrumbs still clinging to your cloak, and the yard is alive with movement. Children dart between the goats, shrieking with laughter as they weave in and out like little warriors in training, but without the swords, thank goodness. Instead of sharpening blades, they're chasing bleating animals, tripping over their own feet and collapsing into heaps of giggles. It's a battlefield of fun, where the goats always seem to win. One child holds a stick high in the air and pretends the staff of power. Another chases after a kid, the baby goat kind, who leaps sideways with an acrobatic flair that would put gymnasts to shame. You catch yourself smiling because the energy is infectious. The goats don't seem to mind being the stars of the game. In fact, they look positively smug about all the attention. Here's the mainstream historical fact anchoring the scene. Viking children were rarely idle. While they were expected to help with chores, they also found plenty of time for play. Archaeological finds include carved toys, miniature ships, and even animal figurines. It's not hard to imagine kids turning the goats themselves into living toys, coaxing them into silly tricks or racing them across the yard. One boy tries to teach his goat to bow. He presses gently on its head, murmuring encouragement, and when the goat finally lowers itself to munch grass, the child cheers as though he's trained a dragon. The goat, for its part, simply keeps chewing, unimpressed or compliant enough to earn a pat. Another girl ties a little wreath of flowers around her goat's horns, turning it into the crowned ruler of the yard. The goat shakes its head once, scattering petals everywhere, and the children squeal with delight. The quirky tidbit that slips in here is this. Some stories hint at goats being taught to pull tiny sleds or carts for children, long before sled dogs claimed the spotlight. Whether this was common practice or just a rare indulgence isn't clear, but you can easily imagine a stubborn goat dragging a child half a meter before refusing to budge. Judging by the chaos in front of you, that scene would have been hilarious for everyone except the poor kid stuck in the cart. You lean against the fence, arms folded, and watch the chaos unfold. The goats dash, leap, and occasionally headbutt each other just for fun. The children mimic them, bumping shoulders and laughing. For a moment, the longhouse yard is less a farm and more a stage where goats and kids, both kind of kids, perform side by side. Historians still argue whether Viking society viewed childhood as a distinct phase of life, or children were simply small adults expected to grow into their roles as quickly as possible. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the middle. Watching these children play, it's easy to see both sides. Their laughter is pure childhood, but the goat tricks and games also serve as practice for patience, cooperation, and maybe a little negotiation with stubborn creatures. The air smells of trampled grass and goat musk, layered over the faint sweetness of wildflowers from the fields beyond. The sun is higher now, warming your face, while the goats cast sharp little shadows as they bounce around. Someone trips, falls into the dirt, and pops back up, brushing themselves off with exaggerated drama, like an actor refusing to let the scene end. A goat bleats at the perfect moment, and everyone bursts into laughter again. You can't help noticing that this is a heartbeat of the community, not the grand feasts or voyages, but these small, ordinary joys. A goat nudges a child's hand, the child squeals, and for a moment everything feels timeless. You picture the same games happening 1,000 years ago, the same laughter echoing across the same yards. Eventually, the children tire, flopping on the grass with goats circling like victorious champions. The animals settle down too, chewing thoughtfully, as if satisfied with their role in the entertainment. You stretch, feeling the sun on your face, and think to yourself that while sagas sing of warriors, it's these moments, the play, the goats, the laughter, that made Viking life bearable. The air in the village shifts as the morning passes. A low hum grows stronger, a ripple of expectation moving to the longhouses, and then you hear it, the deep, echoing call of the horn. It isn't an alarm, it's an invitation. Today is no ordinary day. Today is a feast, and at the heart of it all will be the goats. Villagers emerge from their homes carrying baskets, clay jugs, and woven trays piled high with food. Some bring fish freshly pulled from the river. Others carry loaves of dense rye bread, and a few balanced clay pots filled with sour cream or soft cheese. But there, in the center of the gathering, is what makes the feast sparkle with both excitement and reverence. The goats, decorated like royalty. Each goat wears a wreath of greenery and flowers twisted around its horns. Bright ribbons flutter from collars, dyed with plant-based colors. Reds from madder root, yellows from birch bark, deep blues from woad. You're struck by how much care has gone into dressing them, as though the animals themselves are honored guests. And in truth, they are. Goats gave milk, cheese, hides, and sometimes even meat, and so a feast was both a celebration of their gifts and on occasion, a farewell to one. The smell of roasting meat drifts from the great fire pit in the village center. A haunch of goat has been spitted over the flames, turning slowly while fat drips into coals with a hiss. It's a sharp, savory aroma that mingles with the smell with smoke and the sweetness of honey cakes baking on flat stones. Children circle the fire, sniffing eagerly, while adults laugh and shoo them away until the food is ready. Here's a historical truth woven into this. Viking feasts were central to community life. They were times for alliances to be forged, stories to be told, and honor to be displayed. Livestock, including goats, were often sacrificed during these events, offered to gods in exchange for protection, good harvest, or victory in battle. Archaeological evidence shows goat bones among the remains at feasting sites, proof of their role in both nourishment and ritual. The quirky tidbit, goat heads, when served at the feast, were sometimes decorated or presented whole, eyes staring blankly at the crowd. To us it might seem macabre, but to the Vikings it was a sign of abundance and a reminder that nothing went to waste. Some scholars even suggest the heads were propped up in corners to watch the proceedings, a mix of respect and practicality. Around the fire, voices rise as skalds. The storytellers step forward. One carries a harp-like lyre, plucking at the strings while weaving tales of Thor's goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjostr, who pulled his chariot and could be eaten, then reborn the next day from their bones. The crowd laughs and nods, children wide-eyed at the thought of magical goats who never truly die. The story mirrors the feast itself. Goats as both sustenance and symbol, life and death circling each other in eternal rhythm. You notice how everyone has a role. The young pour meat into carved wooden cups, sticky with honey. The elders carve the roasted meat, passing chunks along wooden platters. Someone sings a drinking song, the kind that starts low and grows louder until even the goats seem to twitch their ears in rhythm. A boy slips a piece of bread to one of the decorated goats, who munches it greedily, ribbons dangling as it chews. The scene is alive with color, smell, and sound. Fire crackles, horns clink, voices roar with laughter. A goat bleats sharply in the middle of a toast, and the crowd erupts in cheers as though the animal itself has joined the celebration. For the Vikings, this wasn't strange. It was expected. The boundary between human and animal, sacred and ordinary, was always more fluid than we imagine. As the sun dips lower, torches are lit around the yard, flames dancing in the breeze. Shadows stretch long across the grass, and the goat's ribbons flutter in the flickering light. You sip from a cup of mead, sweet and fiery, and feel the warmth spread through your chest. There's a raw joy here, a reminder that life, harsh as it could be, was worth celebrating with everything you had. And through it all, the goats remain chewing, bleating, watching. They're not just livestock. They're companions, symbols, offerings, and entertainers. Tonight, they are honored as kings and queens of the feast. The night after the feast is heavy with the weight of laughter, smoke, and too much mead. You wake with the first light, your head woolly, your mouth dry, and the distant sound of goats bleating as though they're mocking you for last night's indulgence. The village stirs slowly, people dragging themselves out of longhouses, fire pits smoldering with the remains of charred wood, scraps of bread scattered where children dropped them before falling asleep on benches. The goats, of course, seem entirely unaffected. They prance through the dew-slick grass, ribbons from last night's decorations still tangled in their fur. One stubborn goat has chewed to the edge of a woven basket, leaving nothing but splinters and a villager's sigh. If anything, they're more lively than usual, as though celebrating their escape from being roasted. You can't help but laugh under your breath. The animals are the only ones who come out of a Viking feast better off than they went in. There's a rhythm to the recovery. First, people gather water in wooden buckets from the nearby stream, splashing faces and shaking off sleep. Then comes a quiet cleaning. Ashes shoveled into piles, platters scraped clean, bones tossed to dogs or buried in the earth. Feasts could leave a mess, but they were also followed by the sense of renewal of the community resetting itself. Archaeological digs show these traces. Pits filled with discarded animal bones, bits of pottery shattered during merriment, even fragments of glass beads that slipped from someone's tunic during a particularly enthusiastic dance. The quirky detail here? Vikings believed that cleaning after a feast wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. A dirty home or hall might attract spirits, the kind that lurk in corners or whisper through rafters at night. Better to tidy up than to give the unseen something to cling to. So as villagers sweep away debris, it's not only to avoid tripping on a bone shard, it's a quiet ritual to keep the night spirits at bay. And yet, not everything is tidied up. Some things are deliberately left behind. A burnt loaf of bread, a cracked cup, or a splintered rib bone might be placed near the hearth as an offering for the land spirits, those mysterious beings tied to the soil and stones. Historians still argue whether these offerings were truly religious or just cautious habit, like the Viking version of better safe than sorry. The goats weave themselves into this recovery process in their usual chaotic way. One butts against the remains of the fire pit, scattering ash into the morning breeze. Another slips its head into a barrel and emerges with honey stuck to its beard, trotting off proudly like it has discovered gold. Children chase after them half-heartedly, too tired from a night before to put up much of a fight. Even in the slow recovery, there are moments of humor. A villager stumbles after a goat that has stolen a wreath of herbs meant for medicine. Another curses when a goat munches on drying clothes left on a fence. The goats don't care about yesterday's rituals or today's chores. They're simply themselves, persistent, troublesome, and oddly comforting in their chaos. As the day wears on, you see how the community uses this recovery time to share the feast again in a different way. Leftover meat is sliced thin and smoked over low flames, preserving it for leaner times. Bones are cracked open for marrow, then boiled for broth. Nothing is wasted. Even the goat hides are stretched and scraped, prepared for later use in clothing or bindings. A modern dinner party leaves crumbs and maybe a few headaches. A Viking feast leaves resources redistributed. Life extended through careful use of what remains. There's a strange peace in this rhythm, celebration followed by quiet restoration. You feel it settle into your bones as you sit by the fire pit, watching the goats nose around for stray bits of bread. The villagers hum to themselves as they work, soft and low, the kind of songs meant more for the worker than the listener. The sky above is bright and clear, as though it too has shrugged off the smoke of last night's revelry. It strikes you that this cycle, feast, recovery, feast again, was the heartbeat of Viking life. Not constant raiding, not endless battles, but this ebb and flow of gathering, celebrating, and resetting. The goats, unbothered by human rituals and worries, embody that rhythm perfectly. They chew, they wander, they butt heads, and tomorrow they'll do it again, unaffected by whether humans feel triumphant or hungover. By the time the sun dips low once more, the village is clean again. Ribbons lie tangled in the grass. Mead cups have been rinsed, and the fire pit is rebuilt for the next use. You watch as a goat climbs onto a pile of logs and bleats triumphantly, like a furry overseer of order restored. And somehow, you find yourself grateful for the feast, for the mess, for the goats who keep it all from becoming too serious. The fire crackles low. Shadows stretch across the longhouse walls, and you find yourself slipping into the circle of listeners as stories begin to unfurl like smoke into the rafters. This isn't the kind of saga where warriors clash swords or gods thunder from mountaintops. No! Tonight is softer, a story night, where goats wander through the imagination as freely as they wander through the fields. A boy sits cross-legged near the hearth, his cheeks smudged with ash, eyes wide as an elder clears his throat. The old man's voice is gravelly, steady, a rhythm shaped by decades of telling the same tales. He begins with a story of Thor's goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjost, the one said to pull the god's chariot across the sky. You picture them, mighty and glowing, sparks flying from their hooves as they gallop. And yet the elder's telling is more domestic than grand. He chuckles as he explains that Thor would roast the goats for supper, then revive them the next day as long as the bones remained unbroken. Don't gnaw the bones too hard, he warns the children with a wink, or Thor might wake up with a limp goat. The kids giggle, tucking their feet closer to themselves, suddenly very aware of the crunching bones in tonight's stew. It's a funny detail, divine livestock that regenerate like something out of a comic book. Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to be taken literally, symbolically, or simply as a lesson in not wasting food. Whatever the truth, it's an oddly comforting story, a reminder that even gods value the practicality of goats. As the fire pops, another villager chimes in with a different kind of tale. This one isn't about gods, but about the goats in the very field outside the longhouse. He swears that one of them has a mischievous spirit, a filja, that sneaks into dreams and nudges sleepers awake at inconvenient times. He claims to have seen glowing eyes in the dark, heard laughter, not human, not animal, when the goats gather at the edge of the forest. It's not a frightening tale, more like the kind of spooky detail designed to keep children close to home after sunset. And honestly, it sounds suspiciously like a cover story for why he overslept chores one morning. The air is thick with warmth, and the rhythm of the storytelling lulls you. Goats weave in and out of the sagas like recurring characters in a sitcom, sometimes divine, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes standing in for deeper mysteries. A woman adds a story about how goats were once thought to sense bad weather better than people. If the goats won't leave the barn, she says, you'd best not leave either. Some nod knowingly, others chuckle, and you realize that this old tale is still used as practical wisdom. There's a fringe tidbit tucked into the conversation, too, whispered like gossip rather than declared as fact. Someone insists that goats' eyes, with their eerie rectangular pupils, can see into the spirit world. The claim is met with half-serious murmurs, half-rolled eyes. Whether true or not, the goat's gaze does hold something uncanny, as if they know secrets but choose to keep them. One by one, the stories blend into each other. There's laughter when someone exaggerates a goat's escape from a pen until it sounds like an epic saga. There are sighs when an elder recalls the old belief that goats guided lost souls across rivers, bleating softly as they led them into the afterlife. The stories aren't cataloged in books or preserved in stone. They're fluid, reshaped with every telling, a communal patchwork of memory and imagination. The goats themselves, outside in the night, punctuate the tales with bleats as though they're offering their own commentary. A kid bleats right on cue when someone describes Thor's goats crashing into a mountain, and the listeners burst into laughter, convinced the animals are in on the performance. It's here, in this dim firelight, that you realize how central storytelling was to daily Viking life. Not just sagas of kings and warriors carved on runestones, but these quiet, everyday tales where goats sneak their way into legends and lullabies. The stories knit people together. They fill the silence of winter. They keep children entertained. They pass on warnings and wisdom disguised as humor. You lean back against the wooden wall, warmth seeping into your back, and let the voices wash over you. The fire glows red, smoke curling upward, and the goat's presence, real or imagined, feels steady, grounding. It isn't a battle saga, not tonight. It's something more ordinary, more human. A gathering of voices, laughter, and goats wandering the stage of the mind. Market day arrives with a soft gray light filtering through the village, and you trudge down the uneven path toward a trading square, your feet crunching on frost-hardened soil. The air carries a mixture of salt from the nearby fjord, the sweet tang of cheese, and the sharp scent of fish drying in the morning sun. Merchants set up wooden stalls, balancing baskets of vegetables, clay pots, and freshly baked bread. The goats follow behind, some tethered, others wandering freely, bleating at anyone who dares to ignore them. You notice the way the villagers navigate this controlled chaos with practiced patience. Mainstream historical fact. Vikings weren't just raiders. They were also meticulous traders. Local markets were hubs for goods ranging from fish and grain to wool, and, importantly, dairy products like goat cheese. Archaeological evidence shows trade routes crisscrossing the Nordic lands, with certain cheeses being prized enough to exchange for metals or imported goods. Even in small village markets, goats were valuable currency in a sense. Their milk and cheese made them portable sources of wealth. A quirky detail emerges as you walk past a stall. One goat has managed to untie itself from a post and is now stealthily nibbling on a pile of turnips. The merchant sighs, not angry, but resigned, muttering that the goat has a better nose for bargains than I do. You can't help but chuckle. It's a subtle reminder that animals weren't just passive resources. They were active participants in everyday life, with personalities that could disrupt even the most orderly market. Historians still argue whether market days were primarily social gatherings or strictly transactional. Evidence suggests both. Villages met to exchange goods, settle disputes, and maintain social bonds. You get the sense that the goats, either through sheer charisma or persistence, played a role in the social fabric as well. After all, a well-behaved goat could draw attention, attract customers, or spark a conversation, while a mischievous one could provide comic relief or chaos. The stalls themselves are a sensory overload. You pass barrels of salted fish, their pungent aroma competing with the sweet smell of baked flatbreads. Clay pots of curdled milk line the edges of tables, while colorful ribbons and simple wooden carvings hang above as decoration, or perhaps as a signal of the merchant's skill and taste. Children tug at goat leashes, laughing as the animals weave through the legs of villagers, occasionally knocking over a basket and scattering its contents. You stop at a stall selling cheese, run your fingers over small rounds of solid white, noting the earthy scent and firm texture. The vendor smiles and slices a piece, offering it to you. The tang is sharp but comforting, grounding you in this simple moment of trade. Nearby, a goat nudges another basket of goods with deliberate determination, its rectangular pupils fixed on a shiny object. The child holding the leash rolls their eyes, tugging gently, as if negotiating with a stubborn miniature overlord. Another quirky tidbit. Some goats in the markets were known to have favorite vendors. They would follow certain people, refusing to leave their side, which led to local legends about goats choosing their humans wisely. It's unclear how widespread this behavior was, but added an unpredictable layer to the already lively atmosphere. You watch as villagers haggle, exchange coins, and gossip, while goats weave through the scene like little actors stealing the spotlight. Some people bring their own produce to sell, while others come merely to browse, observe, and gossip. The market is as much about maintaining connections and sharing news as it is about the exchange of goods. By the time the sun rises fully, the market hums with activity, goats bleating in the background, children laughing, and merchants shouting their wares. You realize that the marketplace is a microcosm of Viking life. Resourcefulness, humor, and adaptability mingle together, with goats somehow at the center of it all. After market day, the village slows into the rhythm of chores, and you find yourself following a path toward the fields where goats graze on coarse grass, herbs, and wildflowers. The air is crisp, carrying a faint tang of the sea, and the soft crunch of frost underfoot echoes like tiny drums across the earth. You notice dew clinging to the tips of grass blades, sparkling in the pale light, and a few birds dipping and swooping, adding their own soundtrack to the morning. The goats move methodically, grazing in loose clusters, occasionally pausing to bleat or nuzzle one another. One ambitious goat climbs a small rise, surveying the land as though appointed guardian of the fields. You trudge along behind, carrying a small satchel of grain to sprinkle as treats. The sound of their contented chewing is oddly hypnotic, a lullaby in its own right, a mainstream historical fact. Goats were essential not only for milk, but also for managing the land. Their grazing helped keep fields clear of overgrowth. Their droppings enriched the soil, and they could survive on terrain too rough for cows. In essence, they were tiny, four-legged farmers, contributing to the ecosystem while providing sustenance. A quirky tidbit. Some Viking farmers claimed goats had favorite plants and would deliberately avoid certain herbs, supposedly because they could sense weather changes. Observers reported that goats nibbling one type of grass over another was sometimes taken as an omen, whether rain, frost, or even impending visitors. You watch a goat nudge a sprig of wild thyme and imagine a Viking whispering, "Ah, rain tomorrow," just as the goat predicted. Historians still argue whether these observations were scientific, spiritual, or purely anecdotal. Regardless, it's clear that goats occupied a complex space in Viking life, simultaneously practical, symbolic, and occasionally mysterious. You pause to watch a pair of goats spar gently, butting heads with playful force. Their hooves kick up tufts of frost, their small bodies vibrating with energy. It's a small, contained battle that draws a few children near, who cheer and mimic the goat's motions. You smile, noting the seamless connection between human play and animal behavior. The sun climbs higher, warming your back, and you see how the goat's grazing patterns shape the landscape. Paths worn in the grass indicate favorite routes. Patches of flattened earth mark resting spots, and scattered droppings serve as markers for both humans and animals. You realize the field isn't just a pasture. It's a living map of daily life. Another quirky observation. Some villagers believe that goats could predict illness. A goat that refused to eat or bleated excessively near a person was sometimes taken as a warning. Whether superstition or coincidence, it added another layer to the animal's presence, making them both companions and silent guardians of health. You sit on a low stone, letting the scene wash over you. The bleating, the crunch of frost, the occasional breeze carrying the scent of herbs. It's a quiet symphony, grounding in its simplicity. You scatter a few grains, watching the goats chase them eagerly, and feel a connection to generations who perform the same act, in the same fields, for sustenance and for joy. By midday, the field hums with life. Children have joined the goats again, weaving between them as if in a gentle dance. A goat nuzzles a child's shoulder, the child laughing, both perfectly at ease. You lean back against the stone, the warmth of the sun seeping into your bones, and recognize the subtle magic in these ordinary moments. Life moving in rhythm, humans and animals intertwined, stories forming in real time. As the afternoon stretches lazily across the village, you wander back toward the longhouse, feet crunching over frosty soil, carrying a small bundle of herbs plucked from the edge of the fields. The goats trail behind, curious and ever opportunistic, snuffling at your satchel and occasionally nudging your legs as if reminding you they deserve a treat. The sky is a soft wash of pale blue, and a gentle breeze carries the faint scent of smoke from distant hearths, mixing with the earthy aroma of the grazing fields. Inside the longhouse, the hearth glows steadily, smoke curling upward through the central vent. The smell of simmering stew promises comfort after a long day in the chill, and you notice how the structure itself seems to embrace warmth. The wooden beams are darkened with age, polished smooth by hands over decades, and the floor, though uneven, carries a faint imprint of countless footsteps. There's a rhythm to the life here, almost meditative, punctuated by the bleating of goats waiting outside. Mainstream historical fact. Viking longhouses were multifunctional spaces, serving as homes, workshops, storage, and even gathering halls. Their design, long, narrow, and built with thick timber walls, was practical for both warmth and community. The hearth at the center not only provided heat and a place for cooking, but also a focal point for stories, work, and daily life. Goats often roamed the attached yards or were tethered nearby, a living extension of the household. A quirky detail appears as you notice a goat lounging in a corner, seemingly studying a pile of herbs you carry. Some folklore suggests goats have a taste for magical plants, nibbling selectively as if aware of their uses in healing or ritual. You chuckle, imagining a goat evaluating your harvest with the scrutiny of an experienced apothecary. Historians still argue whether Viking herbal practices were primarily practical, magical, or a mixture of both. Remedies and rituals often blurred together, with leaves and roots serving both as medicine and as symbolic gestures. As you lay the herbs on a low table, it feels fitting that goats are nearby, overseeing the mundane and mystical alike. Children drift in, drawn by the scent of the stew, and settle around the hearth. One of them, still dusted with frost from the morning fields, offers you a crooked smile and asks if the goats get any of the stew. You laugh softly, shaking your head. In reality, the goats will receive scraps, but the main portions are reserved for humans, a delicate balance of generosity and practicality. Another quirky tidbit. Some stories claim goats would taste test food before humans, ensuring it was safe to eat. Whether this is true or just imaginative storytelling is unclear, but you watch a goat nudge a stray piece of bread toward a child who giggles, and you wonder if maybe the tales aren't entirely fabricated. The stew simmers, and you scoop a ladleful into a wooden bowl. The smell of root vegetables, grains, and a hint of goat broth fills the air. The children eat quickly, occasionally glancing at the goats outside, as if silently comparing who gets the better portions. You settle near the hearth, watching flickering shadows dance across the walls, and feel the quiet continuity of daily life. Work, nourishment, and the unspoken companionship of animals. The afternoon stretches on with a comforting monotony. Someone sharpens tools near the far wall, another mends clothing, while outside, the goats wander in the yard, their bleats punctuating the calm. The simplicity is almost hypnotic. Chores repeated, stories retold, laughter rising and fading. You realize this rhythm is part of what made life bearable in Viking times. The quiet interludes, the shared meals, the trust in animals that were both companions and helpers. By the time the sun begins to tilt toward the horizon, the longhouse feels alive yet peaceful. Goats settle in corners outside. Children nap in the warmth of the hearth, and the day's work lingers in the soft weariness of muscles. You lean back, appreciating the seamless intertwining of human and animal, practical and mystical, mundane and story-filled. Evening drapes over the village like a soft wool blanket, cooling the air and muting colors into gentle shades of amber and gray. You wander back outside, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth, and notice the goats wandering lazily, their breaths forming little clouds that vanish quickly in the crisp air. Some graze, some lie down, and one particularly bold goat struts around like a tiny monarch, head high, Ribbons from yesterday's feast caught briefly in the fading sunlight. The faint hum of conversation drifts from the longhouses, interspersed with the occasional clang of metal. Someone sharpening a tool, another hammering a plank. But out here in the yard, the rhythm is slower, measured, almost hypnotic. You catch yourself counting the bleats, the occasional rustle of grass, and the crunch of your own footsteps. There's a simplicity here that makes your shoulders relax in ways the indoor warmth cannot replicate. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Vikings had a nuanced understanding of animal husbandry. Beyond milk, meat, and hides, goats were valued for their ability to clear undergrowth and manage pasturelands, effectively shaping the landscape while providing for the household. You can see the traces of that work here. Paths worn in the grass, bare patches where goats rest frequently, and small mounds of droppings that will fertilize the soil for next season. A quirky tidbit. Some villages believed goats could sense weather changes. If they huddled together or became restless, it was taken as a warning of storms or frost. You watch one goat pause, lifting its head, ears twitching, and wonder if it's predicting the weather or just spotting crow in the distance. Either way, villagers took note, trusting the intuition of these four-legged forecasters. Historians still argue whether these animal-based predictions were truly functional or more a reflection of superstition. But regardless of accuracy, they demonstrate how intertwined daily life and animal observation were in Viking society. Farmers, herders, and children alike learned to read subtle cues, blending practicality with folklore. You squat near a small patch of herbs, scattering a handful of oats for the goats. They approach eagerly, nibbling with a careful precision that suggests both hunger and habit. You notice the rectangular pupils of their eyes catch the dying light, giving them an almost mystical look, as though the folklore about their seeing into other realms has some tangible truth. One goat headbutts another playfully, and a clash sends a cloud of frost into the air. The children, still lingering despite the lengthening shadows, burst into laughter and mimic the goat's movements. It's impossible not to smile. Their mimicry blurs a line between human and animal, work and play, ordinary and magical. You pause, leaning back against a post, and watch the slow dance of twilight. Shadows stretch across the yard. Goats meander, and the sky deepens into muted purples and blues. A distant owl hoots, answering the bleats faintly, and you imagine that even the forest participates in this quiet evening ritual. A fringe observation. Some elders whisper that goats have souls capable of wandering beyond the farm, acting as guardians of households while humans sleep. Whether that's myth or metaphor doesn't matter. Sitting here, watching the goats, you sense a calm authority in their presence, a reminder that life, even at its simplest, has rhythm, order, and occasional wonder. As darkness settles fully, the last sliver of sunlight glints off a goat's horns, and you feel the soft pull of night in your own bones. The animals retreat to their shelters or settle in familiar corners. The children follow, yawning and stretching, and the village exhales collectively, readying itself for another night. Night deepens, and the longhouse glows softly from the flickering fire inside. You wander toward the edge of the yard, boots silent on the frosty grass, as the goats settle into their familiar spots. Some curl into little circles, tails tucked, eyes half closed, while others stretch and shift, bleating softly in the quiet. The air is dense with the smell of smoke, wood, and earth, a scent that feels grounding and eternal. You notice how the animal's breathing becomes rhythmic, almost meditative. Each exhale puffs into the cold night, dissipating quickly, leaving a delicate mist that catches the firelight from the longhouse. A few stray stars peek through the clouded sky, and you realize this moment, the animals, the earth, the village breathing in unison, is a snapshot of continuity across centuries. Mainstream historical fact. Vikings often kept animals close at night for safety and warmth. Goats, sheep, and sometimes pigs would sleep near or even inside longhouses, especially during harsh winters. Their body heat and proximity served both practical and social purposes, strengthening the human-animal bond. Archaeological evidence suggests that animal enclosures were often integrated with living spaces, reflecting the deep reliance on livestock. A quirky tidbit. Some tales claim that if a goat bleated in a dream or sleep, it was interpreted as a message from the gods. While no one could prove this scientifically, villagers often woke up and recounted these nocturnal omens with solemn faces, blending superstition and entertainment seamlessly. You imagine a child dreaming of a bleating goat and waking to share the story with wide eyes, sparking laughter and hushed reverence simultaneously. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were pervasive or localized, yet the recurring theme across sources is clear. Goats occupied a symbolic as well as practical role in Viking households. They were food companions and conduits for imagination, folklore, and guidance. Outside, a single goat ventures slightly further, investigating a shadow cast by a fence post. Its movements are deliberate but curious, a gentle reminder that even in darkness, life persists and adapts. The other goats acknowledge it with low, contented bleats, and the field seems alive without being chaotic. Nature and human order in fragile balance. You settle near the fence, taking in the scene. The silence is punctuated by occasional sounds. The rustle of the goat shifting, the far-off call of an owl, the distant murmurs of someone tending the fire inside. Each small noise feels amplified in the night, adding texture to quietude. Another quirky detail. Elders sometimes claim that goats could speak to spirits, carrying small offerings placed in their stalls to the otherworldly. Whether true or just a comforting story, it illustrates the symbolic weight attributed to these animals. You glance at a goat munching on a bit of hay, and for a moment, it seems to nod knowingly, as if acknowledging the unseen audience. The village itself feels suspended in time. Shadows lengthen and merge. The air grows colder, and the faint clatter of utensils inside signals the final tidying of the day. Children yawn, stretch, and curl up near the hearth, sometimes accompanied by a nuzzling goat. The blend of warmth, quiet, and animal presence forms a cocoon of safety, comfort, and gentle rhythm. You imagine the same scene centuries ago. The same animals, same smells, same human routines, all repeating in cycles that bind generations together. The goats, ever present, are the silent witnesses and cohabitants of this continuity. You lean against a post, letting your eyes drift shut for just a moment, content in the simple, enduring melody of night in a Viking village. The village now rests in a lull of night, the longhouse casting a warm, amber glow into the courtyard, while shadows stretch across the frost-slicked earth. You walk quietly, boots muffled against the frozen ground, and notice the goats clustered near the fence, their breath rising in delicate clouds that fade quickly into the chill air. The stars above glimmer faintly through thin clouds, each one a pinprick of light reflecting off the icy, dew-coating the grass. Inside, the low hum of the last embers of fire accompanies the muffled snores of those too tired from the day's work and play. Children curl into blankets, a small hand occasionally reaching out to touch a sleeping goat that has slipped inside the longhouse for warmth. There's a comfort in the rhythm of breathing, human and animal intertwined, creating a lullaby more subtle than any sung song. A mainstream historical fact anchors the night. Vikings often used animals as living alarm systems. Goats, along with dogs and even cats, could alert households to intruders or predators. Their bleats and movement at night weren't just charming. They were practical, a natural security measure before the invention of locks and alarms. A quirky tidbit surfaces as one goat nudges a bundle of herbs toward a sleeping child. Some tales claim that goats will protect infants from spirits or bad dreams simply by their presence, standing guard silently and ensuring that only gentle thoughts fill the night air. You watch the interaction, smiling at the imagined mysticism of it. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widely held or mostly localized folklore. Regardless, the stories reveal a worldview where humans and animals coexisted with mutual benefit and symbolic resonance. The goats are more than livestock. They are participants in the social, spiritual, and emotional fabric of the village. You step into the soft shadow of a barn, brushing past a goat that stretches its legs lazily, nearly nudging you with a playful swipe of its head. Outside, the wind carries the faint smell of wood smoke and frostbitten earth. The combination of scents, the stillness, and the subtle sounds of goats settling creates an almost hypnotic atmosphere. A fringe observation. Some elders whisper that the rectangular pupils of goats could see into other realms, detecting spirits or presences invisible to humans. Sitting here, watching the animals, you wonder if it's fanciful superstition or a reminder of how humans projected meaning onto the natural world. Either way, The effect is calming, a quiet mystery that deepens the night's serenity. The goats shift and stretch, nibbling at hay, curling into corners, or bleating softly to one another. Their presence forms a steady rhythm, an unspoken cadence of life. You notice how the children's dreams, if disturbed, are gently soothed by the familiar sounds and warmth of the animals nearby. There's a profound, subtle comfort in this, a knowledge that life continues in predictable, reassuring cycles even in the cold of night. The village rests as one entity, humans and animals breathing together, sharing warmth and preserving routines that have lasted generations. You pause to take a deep breath, feeling the night settle into your chest, letting the quiet work its magic. The goats, guardians and companions, continue their gentle vigil, the final actors in the day's unending, understated performance. The first light of dawn creeps over the horizon, painting the village in soft pastels and sending long shadows across frost-covered earth. You trudge along the familiar path to the goat pens, boots crunching lightly, the cold air crisp against your cheeks. The goats stretch, bleat, and yawn, shaking the last remnants of sleep from their coats, ribbons fluttering faintly in the morning breeze, like tiny banners of a long night's adventures. Inside the longhouse, the scent of porridge and fresh bread drifts from a hearth. You watch as villagers begin their routines again. Water drawn from the well, utensils scraped clean, clothes straightened. The goats follow, some tethered, some wandering freely, weaving themselves into the fabric of the morning. Their presence is unhurried, grounding, a reminder that life doesn't always need a rush, even in a world that often demands it. A mainstream historical fact. Goats were invaluable in Viking households, providing milk, cheese, meat, and hides. They were integral to daily survival, particularly during harsh winters, and their care required attentiveness, patience, and knowledge of pastures and seasons. You notice the subtle signs of that knowledge in the way villagers handle them, moving them gently from field to pen, ensuring access to sun, water, and fresh grass. A quirky detail. Some stories suggest goats were employed as alarm clocks by tugging at doors or nibbling clothing at dawn. You watch a particularly persistent goat poke a child awake, and you can't help but laugh. Some things clearly never change. The mix of mischief and reliability has been part of their charm for centuries. Historians still argue whether such anecdotes are symbolic exaggerations or reflect widespread behavior, but it's clear goats occupied both functional and narrative roles in Viking life. Their presence was practical, symbolic, and at times, downright entertaining. You walk among them, scattering small portions of grain, noticing how each goat has its own personality. One approaches cautiously, sniffing before nibbling. Another boldly takes what's offered, chest puffed as if asserting dominance. Their behaviors are almost theatrical, a morning performance in miniature, and you find yourself observing with amused attention. The villagers gradually gather near the hearth for breakfast, sharing the last of the night's stew or porridge. Children chase playful goats in the yard, laughter punctuating the quiet morning. You pause, taking in the scene, the smoke rising from chimneys, the faint hum of conversation, the bleats of goats echoing softly in the crisp air. It's a tableau of continuity, rhythm, and gentle chaos. As the sun climbs higher, warming the earth, you realize how much the goats shape daily life. Through work, ritual, and companionship, they are observers, participants, and sometimes co-conspirators in small, mischievous acts. In their quiet, persistent way, they remind everyone of the simple pleasures, small routines, and enduring cycles that define life here. The village hums with energy, but the calm presence of goats keeps it grounded. You watch as one curls near the hearth, eyes half closed, content. Another bleats softly to greet a passerby, as if acknowledging that the day has begun anew. There's a timelessness to the scene, a quiet magic rooted in daily care, shared stories in the gentle, persistent rhythm of animals and humans living side by side. Now, the village exhales into the soft embrace of the morning, and you feel the weight of the day settle gently on your shoulders. The goats have wandered into corners of the yard, finding patches of sun or the warmth of straw to curl into, their breaths forming delicate clouds that fade softly in the chill. Children move quietly, still half dreaming, while the villagers go about simple routines, their steps measured, unhurried. You notice how every sound, The low bleat of a goat, the soft clink of a wooden ladle, the distant rustle of frost-laden grass, blends into a gentle symphony that seems to pulse with the heartbeat of the village itself. The air feels alive yet calm. You trace your gaze across the frost-sparkled fields, the longhouses with their smoke curling into pale sky, and the goats moving with serene purpose. There's a rhythm here, slow and dependable, a cycle of life that has persisted for centuries. You can imagine countless mornings just like this. The same light, the same quiet warmth, the same tiny chaos of goats asserting their personalities while humans observe, adapt, and share stories. It's the comfort of continuity, the steady reassurance that life is predictable in its gentlest ways, even amid the mischief and unpredictability of four-legged companions. You let yourself sink into the moment, feeling a soft lull in your chest. The village, the goats, the children, the elders, all part of a seamless, flowing tapestry. Shadows lengthen and shift. Sunlight grows warmer, and the slow rhythm of daily chores continues unbroken. There's an intimacy in observing these small, deliberate movements, the interconnectedness of life, and the quiet magic of ordinary existence. As your mind drifts, you picture the goats, their rectangular pupils catching glints of light, their soft fur brushing against straw, their bleats punctuating the calm. They are simple, steadfast, and strangely wise in their way, living reminders that even in quiet moments, life carries on gently, predictably, yet full of small surprises. The world can pause, and in that pause, there's space to breathe, to notice, to be present. Feel the warmth of the longhouse, the crispness of the air, the soft rustle of animals and earth. Let the gentle cadence of this morning village lull you, a steady rhythm carried by centuries of life, laughter, and companionship. Every sound, every movement, every subtle detail is part of a quiet story, and you are welcome to linger here a little longer, breathing slowly, letting the calm sink in, feeling the steady pulse of life surrounding you. The goats settle completely now. The children nap. The villagers work quietly, and the day stretches ahead with promise and familiarity. Allow your thoughts to drift with them, soft and untroubled, as the village breathes and the earth spins gently beneath the frost and sun.